Great. Welcome to today's episode. This is going to be awesome because we're interviewing Gary Alt. And Gary's a life coach and an author and a musician now, which is of special interest to me because I love music and books. But that wasn't always the case. And there's a fascinating story about how he's ended up here and a lot of lessons that we can learn, especially with recovering from being in a high control group like the organization. So the person we actually want to listen to here, Gary, welcome. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Do you want to explain a bit of your background? Because as you were telling me beforehand, I was like, this is great. I wish I'd pressed record like five minutes ago because it was so interesting from the get-go. But, you know, if you want to explain a little bit about what you're doing now and how you ended up there and, you know, the place that you began ultimately.
Okay. Well, in brief, what I'm doing now is I'm kind of doing two things professionally. I'm a life coach because I found out that I've been a life coach for decades. I just didn't know it because people tend to, I think people just have a sense when somebody knows how to listen. And I've had it where people that I've never met before all of a sudden start telling me all kinds of personal things. And then I find out that that's actually unusual for them. Like a friend sitting nearby will say, wow, he never talks about that stuff. I can't believe it. I just met this guy. I think people just have a sense that maybe this person is someone they can talk to. And if they know you, then it's even so much the better. So it's just been for all my life, practically all my adult life anyway, that people do that. And I just ask questions and listen pretty much. But, you know, I just really listen. And it's amazing how it helps people to focus, and they've solved their problems, and they thank me for giving them the answers. And I'm like, what answer did I don't recall telling you anything. So I kind of realized that I'm sort of a life coach, so I got certified. So I do that, but I'm also a financial advisor, which is my, you know, maybe half and half. I'm trying to phase that out in favor of just being a full-time life coach. As you mentioned, I'm also a musician. I've been doing that ever since I can remember. And started writing songs, I guess, about 25 years ago and recording. My first recordings were all really just for Jehovah's Witnesses. And then I realized that doesn't really go anywhere. Even though I was still in, I decided to make music for everybody.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm not in anymore. So now that's all I do. Yes, that's it. I mean, I was an elder for years when I was in the organization. And that's, you know, shaped my thinking, obviously. But it's... But anyway, that's kind of what I'm doing today. The way I got there is another thing altogether. I don't know if you want me to go into that.
Yeah, sure. And a little bit later, I do want to talk about how you have sort of found your, you know, gifts and talents and rebuilt things, because something a lot of people struggle with is this idea of, well, I missed out on college and an education and the opportunities of networking and university. So now I'm, you know, older in life, like 20, 30, 40, etc. And I don't know what to do to start afresh. But I think that we'll get there naturally as the conversation goes on. So yeah, to begin with, I'm curious about how you went from being an elder and very much in the organization to then making your way to being no longer in it.
Okay. Well, first, you know, it doesn't, my story doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless I kind of do it in three segments, which is like how I got in, which is not a long story. And then what happened for me to get out, and then, you know, how I got to where I am today. So if I could just spend a minute or so just telling you how I get in. Back in the 70s, way back, you know, back in what during the Lincoln administration, maybe, I was a teenager, and where I lived, it was very, very different from anywhere else I've ever been. Not dramatically different, but in terms of the control, it wasn't evident to me. Like you talked about not being able to go to college, that was not a thing back in Westbury, Long Island, where I you know, started studying the Bible and got baptized. Yeah, there were people that felt that way, but the elders did not cram it down anybody's throat. They didn't shame people. They didn't, you know, have people isolated because of being disobedient and going to college. Those things just didn't happen. It was your personal choice. In general, the information from the organization was that it wasn't encouraged, and that's the way we took it. So a lot of people did forego that kind of thing. But I didn't go to college just because I didn't want to. It really had nothing to do with organizational pressure. And it was like that with a lot of things. It really wasn't control, like I see routinely today, like pretty much everywhere. So so that's how I came in. And it was a shock to my system when I finally moved to a congregation in New Jersey. I was at Bethel for a while, for about 3 years in Brooklyn, Bethel. And when I moved to a congregation up in Sussex, New Jersey, after we started a family, I was married when I went to Bethel. It was a shock, at how well in the United States we call it redneck. It's a certain kind of culture and mentality, and it was very much like that. But it was kind of like an insane asylum in terms of the control and how it was just nuts. I don't know how else to explain it. And I was appointed as an elder at that point, and I sort of rebelled against that. I was made the secretary right away, which put me on the service committee, which is the elder body of the elder body, kind of sort of, which I was trying to de-emphasize, but that's what they wanted everybody to think, was these guys are special, and I never felt that way. But I just saw how people were being treated just horribly, and I just said, I thought, well, I'd rather be part of the solution than part of the problem. So rather than walk away from it, I said, let me stick around. And I got in lots of trouble with the elder body, with the circuit overseers, a lot of grueling heartache that I won't want to go into unless you ask me about it, because it's a lot of stories. But the point is that I got in trouble for it, and eventually I had to step down. Not directly because of that, but because of an indiscretion of mine that was really nothing. But somebody made a big deal about it, and so they said, "Why don't you step down rather than bring it to the whole elder body?" Well, from that point, I said, "Okay, fine. If for the sake of peace and helping somebody out that doesn't have it together, that's okay. That's what I'll do." So right away, I started being treated differently, and so that was like 25 years ago. And eventually I got reappointed as a ministerial servant after some, major emotional downspins, downturns, I should say. So I'm trying to fast forward to make this as short as possible. Eventually I was reappointed as a ministerial servant, but then I was kind of wondering, like, what do I have to do to be an elder again? And I wasn't getting real answers. I was just getting accusations with no substance, like no basis, no, you did this here and there, and this person can tell you, and we saw this, and this is an example of this kind of behavior that we're talking about. Nothing, absolutely nothing. And it would drive me crazy, because you're supposed to believe that these guys have Holy Spirit and they're appointed by Holy Spirit. And even though I knew better, because I was an elder, I knew from the inside that they were very actually incompetent. I had no problems admitting that to myself. At the same time, you're supposed to respect their authority, otherwise you're blowing the whole thing, So I would just lay awake at night, just not even able to focus on anything positive. It was just a major depression, which I thought I was clinically depressed. Only until after I got out of the organization, I realized that no, it's not what it is. It was because of circumstances. And so no medications or anything, which is fine if people need to take them, but I don't need them, because my problem was these guys that would drive me crazy. So anyway, what ended up happening was my wife was a very, very typical by the book witness, but not according to the actual book, but according to her version of the book. And she really wanted out of the marriage. Obviously, I mean, she really wanted that for years. And so at one point, she kind of came up with a plan to get rid of me, which included having me arrested on false charges. And so what this has to do with the witnesses, and so we got a divorce. It wasn't scriptural, so-called, because it had nothing to do with adultery, but at least she got a divorce, finally. And she thought she was going to make me commit adultery because, worldly people always commit adultery, right? So basically what happened was overnight, and this is where the story really starts, overnight, like in an instant, almost all of my former friends, except for maybe a handful, which might not even be a full hand, maybe 4 people, I don't know, just totally abandoned me and started shunning me like I was disfellowshipped, even though I wasn't for like another 4 years, and there was nothing to be disfellowshipped for. So I immediately realized that the brotherhood is a sham. You know, I always thought that, well, you can meet somebody on the other side of the earth for the first time, and they'll put you up in their house, and they'll have, well, yeah, those things do happen. They happen to us, and we were recipients as well as givers of that kind of you know, hospitality and such. But I started to realize that it's all conditional. It's just, you know, as long as you're, that's what you've done recently, kind of thing. And I had no problem connecting from that instantaneously, because I just, oh, okay, these people don't care about me. And you know what? I guess they never really did. They cared about a person that was doing what they thought was right. But, and you know, you don't want to associate with people that are doing things that are clearly wrong. You know what I mean about not doing things right. I mean, it's just like you had a question or something, you know. So I just realized immediately that the Brotherhood is a sham, but I still believed it was the truth. And but I was totally isolated, you know. So
Delve into that a bit, because I had a very similar sentiment in terms of, so I was disfellowshipped, I think about 4 years ago now, and the feeling I had eventually was like, look, after 2 years of that arbitrary kind of the stuff you described, where it's like, well, no, we can't reinstate you, but there's no real reason not to, and you're not doing anything wrong, and if you were in the congregation, you'd be one of the most upstanding members, but we'll just keep you out because some arbitrary reason, not enough time has passed. And so eventually I got disillusioned, and I was like, well, the religion's true, but the execution of it is flawed. And so I was in that place that I think, by the sounds of it, that similar place where you describe, where you're still believing in it, but just seeing the obvious flaws in the way it was carried out. So I'm curious about how that unfolded for you and the conclusions you reached there.
Well, that actually started, like that thinking on my part started, you know, around, I don't know how many years ago, but it was sort of gradual. But I think what really, so I believed it was the truth, just like you, but yet, as you said, the execution of it. I think because I was sort of on the outside looking in more. I mean, not just as on the elder body, but in terms of the organization, I was more on the outside looking in. Your picture just went away. You still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. I just turned my video off to save on the internet bandwidth a bit.
That's okay, because I had a little thing that said unstable connection before. I didn't want it to mess up on my end. But so being on the outside looking in, I started to see things that were actually outrageous to me, like the way the elder body is viewed, everybody is viewed. Yeah, should have respect for them if we, you know, are in that organization. But it was pretty much worship, you know, like these guys, like, oh, as individuals, we know they're imperfect. Of course, you'll never know what those imperfections are because we can't talk about them. But as a body, everything they decide is just exactly what God. Yeah, I mean, they came out with I mean, a whole bunch of things happened, like the dissolution of the book stuff, which was for completely different reasons than they'll tell you now. We saw it unfold. I remember the letters that were sent to the different congregations. That it's a totally different story, and they just hide it, you know. And what really got me was the new definition of generation. I've never seen anything like that before, where they just completely made it up, and there was absolutely no scriptural backing for it at all, except for one verse that had nothing to do with anything. And it was so illogical. And I just thought, well, you know what? I still believe that we're living in the time of the end, and that Armageddon's going to come, maybe in my lifetime, maybe not, but it doesn't matter because this is the right thing to do anyway. What's the difference? And I figured, you know, if you know, they'll eventually change it, because I know that this has to be wrong. It just has to be. So they'll eventually change it. I don't really care. You know, the light gets brighter and brighter, right? So you kind of I'm still duping myself, you know. But all that internal stuff, like the virtual worship of the elder body and the governing body, like they can do no wrong, which is like the perfect formula for cultic thinking, you know, where you just have to believe that they're right. So they're right because they're right. That's the circular thinking, you know. So I think that was developing in me, you know, over time, and that's why I was very, very uncomfortable even being at the meetings in the last 10 years or so. But I always went, really, because it was always my habit to go, and I always thought that this is the only place to stay connected to the organization and to therefore to God and to the truth and you know, to be, in line for survival and all that kind of stuff. And also for my kids, I have 3 kids who are now in their 30s, but I said, I've got to, they were probably in their 20s at the time, but I just always wanted to set the example for them, because I thought the only thing that's right for them to do is to stay going to the meetings and everything, you know. So that's kind of how it developed. And as I said, when the Brotherhood collapsed, or seemingly collapsed, it turns out it was always a sham. You know, that's when I really, really felt alienated. I just felt like it had nothing to do with anything, you know. I don't know if you want me to go into like how I finally learned about how it's not the truth, or does that answer your question?
That does answer the question. I'm curious. So as we follow the timeline forward, then, so you served in Bethel for a while. You were an elder in this congregation in New Jersey, and you began to see from the inside the irregularities. And you mentioned as well something that I think is just a really nice myth busting thing that's just showing up through our conversation without really planning or asking for this, is not everyone is, it's not like something didn't go your way, you didn't get you don't call it promotion, do you? Like you didn't get the new privilege that you wanted, so you've turned into some bitter, flag burning, pitchfork waving apostate. It's that there was a genuine appreciation for what's right, a genuine belief, and seeing the problems, but wanting to try and bring things in line for the right reasons and all of that. So it's been very much a gradual journey where you've been gathering evidence and having these experiences that you can only ignore stuff for so long, right?
Right.
So
right.
so from there, so that happened, and you mentioned your I'm not sure where the divorce happened in the timeline, but so moving forward, then that took you to the point of trying to get back into the elder body, but there were very kind of arbitrary stipulations, not really sure how to make progress, and that resulted in a lot of mental and emotional anguish, understandably enough, by the sounds of it.
Right. Yeah. In hindsight, I think I was always a threat to them, because I not intentionally, but I always made them look bad, because they were not shepherds, you know, and they were always doing things terribly, you know, just very incompetent and mean, you know, and I wasn't trying to, you know, show them up to be bad or anything like that, but I just tried to do what was right. And what was right. See, I thought that I was just bucking heads with them, but over time, what I started to realize is that this is not the anomaly. Like, I thought that Westbury, where I came in, was normal, and everything else outside of that is I mean, they weren't perfect either, but generally speaking, they were more what I would call Christian people, and everything else that deviates from that in any way is the anomaly. And I started to realize just from reading the Watchtower, actually, because like you know how almost every magazine says something glorious about elders, about how the one sister was helped by the elders to realize this or that, and it's like she couldn't figure that out herself, you know. But when they would have articles specifically about elders, like especially study articles, I started to realize that these articles are talking about what it could be like if they all did what they're supposed to be doing, as opposed to this is what it is like, but this is what, I don't know if I said that backwards. So in other words, they're written from the standpoint of this is what elders do. This is how wonderful they are, as opposed to this is how wonderful they could be if they did this, and that. It doesn't always work that way, but let's give them a break, you know, kind of thing. And I started to realize that the reason things are the way they are is because the governing body wants them to be that way. You know, it's very clear that the authoritarian methods of elder bodies are, I mean, it's sanctioned. I've never seen any discipline for it among an elder body. You have to be, there has to be unanimous agreement among the elder body and the circuit overseer in order for an elder to be removed or disciplined or something like that. So if there's one guy on a body of 12 that doesn't agree with this, it doesn't carry, you know. So there really is nothing but a slap on the wrist until everybody agrees that this guy did something horrible, you know. So I just started to realize that the things are the way they are everywhere because it's by design. And Westbury was the anomaly. They were the ones that were doing things in a bizarre way because they were being more like a Jesus would want you to be, you know. So that was kind of the part of my transformation, and then so the divorce happened. I mean, this thing where I was arrested was back in 2012, and the fact is I wasn't allowed to go to my Kingdom Hall, and so part of the reason why everybody believed her stories like hook, line, and sinker right out of the gate was because I couldn't even defend myself. And you know how it is with the witnesses, defending yourself is actually like admission of guilt kind of a thing. Like you're not supposed to do that because we're supposed to be humble and allow Jehovah to take care of things in his own new time and all this crap that doesn't even make any sense, you know? So, you know, you might as well forget about trying to prove to somebody that you didn't do something because they're just going to believe it. And the fact that I wasn't going to the Kingdom Hall of choice, the one I wanted to go to where I always went, was proof to people that, wow, he's spiritually weak. And you know how it is now. Maybe not years ago, but nowadays, if you're spiritually weak, you might as well be disfellowshipped. That's the way they treat you. So the divorce happened about a year later. And then it was a matter, well, from the time I was arrested, it was just a matter of, okay, I mean, I lost literally everything. Well, not literally, I could still breathe. But I may lost my family. You know, my kid, even my kids were very, like, one kind of decided I wasn't worth talking to. The other two were angry, and it was very awkward and this and that. You know, so I lost them, but I lost my wife, and I lost pretty much all of my friends I ever had, and that's permanent. And even though I wasn't disfellowshipped yet, I lost my job and my bank accounts. I was homeless for a period of time. So what else can you lose? You know, I mean, I literally couldn't work in the living that I was used to because of the arrest, because I have to report things like that in my job. So for quite a while, I couldn't work in that line of work. So I finally accepted a very menial, very, very low paying job just to get by. So, you know, so basically I lost everything. So what do you do? What do you rebuild? You know, is it the brotherhood? Is it, I have to get back in the truth, or, you know, I have to prove, well, really the only things I could think to work on immediately were, I have to get a job. First of all, I have to, and I have to start building a court case, you know? And so I just decided that and this is kind of the way I've always been, especially when I'm hit with something really big, is I just focus on the things that I can change. If I can't change something, if I can't deal with it today, there's nothing I can do about it. Simplest example I can think of is, let's say your problem is you need to pay your mortgage and it's late, you know, and you just can't because there's no money in the bank account until next Friday. Well, then don't worry about it till next Friday. You know what I mean? You can't, if you're going to stew about it every day, you're going to drive yourself crazy, and all the other problems will be magnified and confused. It'll be a big jumble, a big whole ball of yarn that you can never untangle, you know? So I just decided, what things can I actually deal with and actually change and have power over today? And then let's say there's 3 or 4 things. And I say, okay, which is the most important? So let's just take the first one. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 things at a time because they're related to each other. But basically, you can only focus on one task at a time. So it was very simple. I mean, the first thing I had to do was get a taxi to get from a hospital back to the police station to get my stuff back. That's not a whole big task, but I had to make a phone call, which I couldn't because I didn't have a cell phone anymore. I was at the police station. So, you know, just, it was silly. It was like, all I have to do is make a phone call. I get in the taxi, I get back now my job is to get my cell phone back, get a car back. Well, it turns out I had to use a car that I didn't want to. It was a piece of junk that wasn't actually mine. But so it was just one thing at a time. And then the next big thing was I had to hire a lawyer. So the point is that it's just one thing at a time. Don't worry about what you can't. Like when I finally got the lawyer, it was the weekend, and I went down to my parents' house because I had nowhere to live. They lived about 3 hours from me. And I just said, well, you're not about to hire a lawyer on a Friday night or on a Saturday or Sunday. So we just talked about things, and we kind of tried to relax. And, you know, I mean, I cried more than I ever did in my life that Friday night because it all hit me like a ton of bricks when it all had happened so quickly all at once. But the rest of the time we were just sort of trying to relax, trying to enjoy each other's company. And then I can worry about the lawyer on Monday, you know? So that's the whole way I was able to put my life back together, is just, first of all I'm worried about is defending myself and getting an income. I don't really care about where I go to the meetings or what. And it was just one day at a time. And it went that way for a year or two, just one day at a time until I finally got back into my old career, not making exactly what I used to, but so what? I don't have kids in a house anymore. So whatever, I don't need that much money. So, I finally got my career back just by being tenacious and just saying, I am not sitting or laying at the bottom of this hole that somebody dug for me. They might have pushed me into it back first, but I'm not going to lay at the bottom of this hole forever. I don't know how I'm going to get out, but I'm just going to take it one step at a time. And eventually, at one point, I declared myself out of the hole. I got remarried, which is why I get this fellowship, by the way, because I got remarried. And then basically, I finally, and this is only, I was disfellowshipped in 2016 for having gotten married, which was a farce in itself. But anyway, a regular kangaroo court. But I eventually, in 2018, I guess it was, so 2 years after I was disfellowshipped, I think. Yes, 2 years after I was disfellowshipped is when I finally decided I'm going to research things in terms of the organization and the body of Bible teaching. And honestly, I was looking to defend the organization. I was looking to prove that it really is the truth because I had doubts in my head because of all the misapplications of procedures and all the crazy mechanisms that are set up in the organization that are so controlling. I realized how wrong that was, but I always thought, as you said before, the execution is wrong, but the truth is the truth, right? So I was really, really trying to prove it's the truth. Like we are living in the last days. Jehovah is the true God, et cetera, And little by little, I found out that, in all honesty, it's just not. And it was very gradual. I mean, it was like one little thing at a time. And I would think, well, all right. So they're really wrong about 1914. I mean, it has to be wrong. It's so implausible that that's correct. But we're still living in the time of the end, So, and I started thinking in terms of like percentages, like, okay, maybe let's say they're wrong about 10% of their teachings. That means that they're still right about 90%. Compare that to any other religion on earth. That's pretty darn good. So I figured if anybody has the truth, it's still them. It's nobody else, right? And then, you still whittling away more and more. I think Jack Gregg talks about this too in his story in the Fear to Freedom book. It becomes 40%, 50%, 60% wrong. Whatever the percentage is, whether you're accurate or not, you start to think, how can it be the truth? I mean, everybody's right about something. Even the Catholic Church has something right. Not to pick on Catholics, but just as an example of somebody that we used to pick on all the time, they're no matter what they're wrong about, there's got to be something they're right about. So whether Jehovah's Witnesses are right about 5% or 40%, so what really got me was when I realized that the implications of 1914 being wrong, that throws the whole faithful and discreet slave appointment by Jesus Christ himself into complete disorder, disarray, and then I realized. That's and I started reading about how they actually arrive at their teachings, which was kind of verifiable because I knew every member of the governing body when I was there, and I still had respect for them and everything, and I still do. I still think a lot of those guys were really good men at heart, but maybe not all of them, but I still think that, and they believe it's the truth too, but I started to realize that the way they arrive at decisions, and I could verify it just with conversations that I've had with some of them, that just give you an inkling of how things really work. And I read Ray Francis' book, to be frank, The Crisis of Conscience, and I started to realize that he's an honest man that really had a good heart, that is really not looking to destroy the organization or to defame all his former friends. He's just trying to get people to think, and not the like mean-spirited apostate that we're always led to believe. So I started to look at it and realize that just their whole manner of coming up with decisions was kind of similar to the whole new definition of generation. It's just made up stuff,
Yeah.
So I think that's when I really started to feel free. I felt really free like the minute I was disfellowshipped because I thought I'm never going back. I don't have to. Even if it is the truth, I still believe in Jehovah, that's fine. But I think when I finally made that study, like a couple of years later, is when I really started feeling the freedom, because then everything you've ever been told is up for grabs, you know. Um, all
Yeah,
those
and that's very liberating, I think.
it
Where
is.
on the one hand, it's world shaking because it's like, holy crap, everything I believed in was probably untrue. Um, but that creates opportunity, right? Because it then means, well, this certainty, this certain world I was living in, which was defined by fear and depression and anxiety and really predicated on judgment, right? So the idea of making sure, well, everyone's spiritually strong, and if they're spiritually weak, we judge them, but we're not judging them. We're keeping them at arm's length for their own well-being, and all these complicated or logical traps. When you don't have to do that anymore, that's just such a huge weight off our shoulders, and it gives you the chance to see, okay, what is spirituality important to me, and how can I live in a way that's in alignment with my own conscience rather than just filling the roles that other people have decided that we need to fill. So it's massively liberating.
Right. Yeah, I know a lot of people struggle with, like, you know, they always believe this is the truth, and it's really it's like mourning the death of a loved one to find out it's not. It's like that controlled your thinking in your life, and it gave you hope and everything. So a lot of people struggle with the idea that I don't know what to believe now. I have to believe something, which I get. But to me, one of the liberating things is, and I've heard many people say this, is that we don't have to be right. We don't have to think that everything we believe, we don't have to have an answer for everything. It's actually very liberating, because as humans, we learn. You know, I always say, if I ever get to the point where I'm 95 years old or whatever, and I'm not learning a new thing, that's when my life has to end, because if I'm not human anymore, if you're not, I'm not, you know, I'm not trying to say somebody that's in a coma should just die. I'm not trying to say that, but for me, I just, like, if you're not learning, what are you doing? You know, so that means that you don't know everything. You never know everything. So it's very liberating to realize that we don't have to have the answers to everything. Um, and you know, I mean, everybody's free to everybody's journey is their own. So you're free to believe whatever you want to believe, which is also liberating, you know, because we don't have to judge each other. Like, we haven't really, between you and I, we haven't talked about what we now believe. Like, does it matter? You know, I mean, maybe you're an atheist. I don't know. It's fine. But anyway, that's very liberating too.
Yeah, I think it takes that need to be right, because I sure as hell had that
Mm-hmm.
in my nature after leaving. Even after being disfellowshipped, I was very much I'd do covert ministry. I'd try to not necessarily convert people, because I couldn't claim to be a witness, obviously, but I'd set up the shots and kind of get them asking the questions, so that then the next time a witness knocked on their door, they'd be ready to, they'd be primed, ready for them. So I was still deeply in this thing of, well, it's the truth, and being right is really important. And obviously you don't want to be wrong or you don't want to be living a lie, I think.
Right.
And realizing that is like, well, I would rather not live a lie than cling to something and trick people into thinking I'm right just because I can. And
Right.
it takes a degree of courage to step into some uncertainty and say, look, I just don't know. And be okay with that for long enough to find an answer, rather than just clinging to this thing of, well, it must be true and I'll hedge my bets, because if it's not true, then, or rather, if it is true and I've said it isn't, then I'm going to get smited at Armageddon. So I'd best play it safe and just believe it just in case. And, it takes bravery to break out of that shell.
Right.
But your point about the step-by-step thing is really important, and that coming out of the abyss, as it were, to religious terminology, but that step-by-step thing, like when things are overwhelming, that's what traumatizes people. It's when we're in a situation that's totally outside of our ability to control, and we in that state of no control for so long that our mind goes, we can't deal with this, and so trauma happens then. And so really what you describe of focusing down to just that minimal thing of, look, what can I actually do? What can I do today? And thinking about that and doing that, and not living life like an idiot. And so, if you've got a mortgage next Friday, you take care of that. But you're taking things step by step and in bite-sized pieces. I think for people who are either fresh out and needing to rebuild, or someone who's listening to this and who's in currently, but they know that they have to leave, or they're in the process of leaving, it's a huge deal. There's a lot of life changing going on there, and just knowing to like take it a step at a time. That's a really, I think if you're going to take one thing from this, then that would be a really powerful point.
Yeah. And it's this might be tangential at this point, but you mentioned how difficult it is to, how do I do it? Do I fade? Do I get this fellowship? Do I just resign? It shouldn't be such a big decision, but it is because of fear. And that is how, I use the word cult. I'm not trying to say who is and who isn't a cult, but cults do that. They have a lot of things in common and different implementations of it. But one of the big things that they all do is fear of people on the outside. They're all bad. You can't talk to them. And then fear of what's going to happen to me when I leave, what's going to happen to my kids or to my relationship with them. It's all fear. And that's if you stay in the organization, you're going to live with the fear anyway. It's always going to be there. So once you're past that point, and now it might be really difficult, and I'm sure it is for a lot of people, because now you're living what you had feared, but you find that you're liberated and you're free, and you're more able to deal with
I think we've lost Gary.
Hello?
Oh, I think I've got you back now.
Okay. Well, I was just talking about fear, and so we have irrational fears of what might happen, and half the time things don't even ever do happen. But if we have left and we've lost the association of family members, let's say, well, that's a real thing. You're living with it. But to go back to the structure of fear, where the whole way of controlling you is through fear, you don't have to do that. So now you can deal with what you're now living, and look at the positive things and deal with the perhaps negative things. But fear doesn't have to control you anymore. So
I love what you said, the structure of fear.
Yeah.
That's important, because you still, in life outside, we still have these challenging times, negative emotions, or just, I don't like the word negative emotions, but say painful emotions.
Right,
And,
okay.
we have those, but it's real. It's not like, oh, I've stepped over an imaginary line here, which means I need to be fearful of the consequences of someone finding out and judging me, like the thought police, and reporting me into the elders, and like all these imaginary constructs where it's like, look, you're playing this game, and if you break the imaginary rule in the imaginary game, then you have to feel fear, which is real. Like that's a very real physiological response that shortens our lives, basically, if it's not literal fight or flight. So just stepping into the realm where it's like, look, it is real life, and there are tough elements and there are wonderful elements, but you're handling what's actually going on for you, and dealing with that, rather than seeing, well, is this veneer that I've plastered over myself, of all the hoops I jumped through, and this masquerade of being, of being a Jehovah's Witness, is that all right, while not looking within ourselves? So it's not like challenges go away, but we address the challenges that arguably do make a difference if we're interested in spiritual growth, which I define as the growth of our spirit as a human being. I don't get too complicated with the view, but the addressing what's actually going on for us, rather than dancing around imaginary fear-based constructs. It's a huge step forward.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting too that you mentioned using the term painful emotions as opposed to negative emotions.
Hmm.
Because really, what is a negative emotion? Is sorrow a negative emotion? Well, if someone close to you dies, of course you're going to be sad. I mean, what's abnormal about that? What's negative about that? It's painful. You get past it eventually. So same thing with anger. I mean, there's really no such thing. If it's a negative emotion, why do we feel it? Why is it normal for humans to be sad or angry or scared or what? Those are all things that have their place. But it gets all warped when you're in an organization that likes to control emotions, and that's what they do. Because oh well, it's okay to feel sorry and cry at the funeral or whatever, but at some point it's like, well, we have the hope of the resurrection. You really shouldn't be sad. That's just wrong. I mean, whatever you feel is what you feel. If it's painful, well, let's talk about it. But yeah, I don't think there's such a thing as a negative emotion. I agree with you on that.
Yeah, I always found it, and still find it, frustrating when there's a real thing, good or bad, like you say, a funeral, someone's died, and it's sad, and you're sad about it, and that's totally appropriate. And then there's this inevitable point in a conversation with a witness where it pivots to a sales pitch.
Right.
The resurrection hopes. Oh well, yeah, great. And maybe I just not just want to be. Maybe I need to be sad. Maybe I need to grieve right now. And this idea of, well, you'll be able to see them in the future. That's not dealing with what's currently happening. And even on the positive side, a young child. Yeah, my family, she's gorgeous. I think she's about to turn 6, and just so wondrous towards life, and everything's new. And so, looking at the world and seeing whether it's flowers and just noticing as you walk into town. I don't live in the same town, but I hear things through the grapevine, and just noticing that there's a new flower growing out of a certain wall on the way into town, and life's very beautiful. And then she's at that point where she is making the connection where that stuff's being attributed to God, who she calls Jehovah, which is like, okay, fine. But then there's a point not far in the future where it gets tied to, well, that's nice, and this inevitable genocide has to happen in order for life to be okay. And there's that switch that has to happen where love and appreciation turns into this sales pitch for the organization's understanding of scripture, and just unpicking that from our own minds, where it's like, well, there's a worldwide pandemic right now, therefore that means that's proof of what the organization teaches. Or right. At the beginning of the year I was freaking out because like within short succession, you had this news about this pandemic on the way, and then you had America bombing Iran or something like that. And I was like, holy crap, this is this is not good. And just taking that time to unpick things and like extract yourself from that narrative is, it's no small task, which is why people like yourself as life coaches and myself as hypnotherapists and other people who are providing this support, it's hard to do on your own. And free resources like this and books and all these things that are available, it's important to take advantage of what's there to help us in making that progress.
Yeah.
So I've kind of rambled on. I'm off my soapbox now. You can you can talk now.
I'm trying to think of what to add to that, but sometimes the point is so well made that it's like, okay, I'm interested. You're talking. Go ahead. Should we just take these tracks? Yeah, there's so many things. I just read something this morning by Jack Gray, who's an ex-Jehovah's Witness up in Canada. Just a 2-page treatise, but about freedom and how that freedom we feel that immediately at certain points. Like, for instance, the day you're disfellowshipped, you might feel free if you're the kind of person that wants to go back, you're going to probably think it was the worst day of your life. But if you realize it's all over, you feel free. But then because we're not conditioned to know what freedom is, and like, how do I decide what? Because you didn't really make a lot of decisions in your life, actually. So, the freedom becomes painful. I don't know if I'm really saying it the way Jack did, but it becomes almost a pain within itself. And so now you're actually enslaved to them again, because you start thinking about what, why do I feel this way? It's because of Jehovah's Witnesses. Damn those people, So you're you're stuck in you're submitting to them again in your mind, even if you're never going to go into a kingdom hall again. You're basically submitting to them because you're allowing them to make you feel crappy and to feel chained up, So I thought that's a good point. It's a PDF file. I guess I should, leave it at that, because I don't know how Jack wants it distributed, but and that's something I think that I've experienced a little bit here and there. I've never really felt traumatized by the organization. I mean, my heart goes out to, like victims of child sexual abuse and things like that, because how do you get over that? I don't know. I mean, obviously you can and get past it, but it's still always there, I can't say I was I mean, this stuff that happened when they were kind of, battering me with everything I did wrong without ever proving it and making me feel lousy all the time. I was in my, I don't know, late 40s, early 50s when that started happening. The older you are, the less you are susceptible to trauma, I think. That's my theory anyway, because you're not in those formative years, You certainly can be traumatized by very, significant events. But that was, to me, just something that was in my mind I had to sort out. And what really helped me sort it out was when I was finally kicked out and I started seeing the truth about things. So I can't say that I experienced that, but there are times we'll do it, like with my girlfriend and I, we'll joke about things like, her experience was different from mine. She was raised in the organization. I wasn't. But we'll just joke about things and that we totally forgot about, like, wow, was this crazy or what? Can you believe what this elder said to me 20 years ago, and it's kind of funny in a way. But that's another way that I deal with things, is I see the humor and stuff. And in fact, when I was first on my way out, when I first was after my arrest, and I was starting to get tighter and tighter with my so-called worldly friends and getting more and more of them as friends, just to have a good time with, but also as a support system. The friends that I really cherish the most are the ones that just made me laugh all the time.
Yeah.
There's got to be something to laugh about. You can laugh at yourself. And I'm not saying they can, if you experience the kind of trauma we were talking about that young children can experience, I don't imagine that's ever going to be funny. But that's really been very valuable to me, is how I could just bust out laughing about something. It just clears your head of so much crap, that you just realize that nothing's really important in that moment when you're laughing about something.
Yeah, it's a real palate cleansing emotion, really. And I love laughing. I'm a huge stand-up comedy fan, and I may try it one day. I'll probably be terrible at it, but it just seems like such a fun and benign medium. And you're right. And that, I'm from the UK, so gallows humor is, it's a national sport over here, pretty much. And just the ability to look at a bad situation, specifically our own, like less so with other people, but I found it so helpful to be able to look at myself and my mistakes and unfair things and just find something funny about it. I heard a quote which I'm about to ruin. It was along the lines of that a lot of life is a joke played upon itself, and it's not our place to question the universe's bad taste. It's like there's something ironic, or there's something like, oh my God, that's just typical about some. And when we go to that point where we can, because when you can laugh about something, you're not taking it as seriously, which means that you have more power over it than it has over you, at least emotionally. And I think that's important.
That's a good way to look at it. Yeah, you have power over it. Yeah.
But speaking about having that power and being able to being able to overcome things, whether it's by humor or just perseverance and just pushing through. You mentioned that you've written a book which caught my interest called Force of Will. Do you want to chat a little bit about that and explain it? Because I think that's something people listening could find interesting to check out on your website.
Okay, sure. Yeah. I never, I mean, I've written prose, here and there, never published anything, just little things, So I never in a million years thought I'd write a book, but I was kind of talked into it, and by some of my friends that heard little bits of my story and just thought it was so unbelievable that he said, "Oh my God, you got to write a book." I don't know to what extent they were kidding, but I just thought, yeah, right, I'm going to write a book. Okay, right. And then I just got this idea one day on a way to do it. So I actually did it as a novel based on a true story. So all the names of people and places are changed, events are condensed, and conversations compressed and things like this. But essentially, it's a true story. Everything that's germane to the actual story is absolutely true. So it was. It's called Force of Will, and it's written by Tan Swiftwater, which I'll just tell you that that's me. Obviously, for certain reasons, but at this point, I mean, what Jehovah's Witness is going to read this thing anyway? So I don't care. I almost wish I didn't use a pseudonym; would have been easier. But
what's the name? Tan T. How do you spell that?
Tan, as in get a tan at the beach.
Okay.
T-A-N, and then Swiftwater, one word.
Cool.
Yeah. So if you just Google Tan Swiftwater Force of Will, you'll find it in a heartbeat. There's nothing else is going to come up like that. So it was kind of cathartic. I just was doing it because I have a creative mind. I mean, I write songs all the time, and I record songs, and I play at blues clubs and open mics and stuff. I'm just a creative person, and I can't not be that way, because that's who I am. So once I started writing, I was like, geez, I have no idea how to develop a character, how to develop a plot. Well, I didn't have to, because it was all a true story. It was about me and my family and all these people, and the plot's there, because all I had to do is check. And I've got copious records. I've got all kinds of court documents and other printouts of emails from and to certain people, and I've actually got recordings. I will tell you right now here in public that I've got actual audio recordings of my both judicial hearings, both the original one and the appeal hearing. It's all on CD, and I replicated some of that conversation word for word, except that I took some words out that were superfluous and too voluminous. So I had all this research to do, checking dates and things like this, and so it's actually a very, very accurate story. And it's really just about. It starts out like almost immediately with my arrest. How that all happened. I was a radio DJ at the time, and I was accused of doing something that I couldn't possibly have done, because I was on the radio at the time, live, and there's abundant proof that it was a live broadcast, people calling in,
Yeah.
So everybody that believes the story, every single person that believed my ex-wife's story is a Jehovah's Witness, every single one of them. Every single one of the people that don't believe it, except for maybe two, are not Jehovah's Witnesses. So that tells you something. I mean, none of the story could possibly have happened if it wasn't for the way the organization is, the way they believe things, and the way they isolate people and shun people for anything, not just because you're disfellowshipped. It never would have happened if not for the way that they look and think about things. So it's very much about, I mean, after like 50 pages or something like that, it's kind of gets away from the roller coaster of what happened to this poor guy, and it's not about this poor guy. It's about this guy that survives, so it's not about poor me. It's about like, okay, now what did this guy do? His name is Gil Oldfield. That's me. What did Gil do to climb out of this hole and get his life back to normal? And the way the book ends, it's not even evident in the ending. I mean, I'm not going to give the ending away, but it's not really evident what Gil believes anymore, because at some points in the book he's still defending the organization stupidly, but that's what he's doing, because that's where my mind was at the time, and that's the truth of the story. By the end, it's this enormously freeing thing where I'm disfellowshipped. Now what do I do? But I still hadn't done this discovery I talked to you about finally, reading books and finding the truth about the truth, and then doing research on cults and making a certain decision about that. the book had to end at some point. I'd be still writing it now if I was going to let it go. And so the way it ends, it's like, what does this guy believe? I know he's free, and so there's more to the story. I wrote a second book that's really available on PDF only because I don't want people reading it if they haven't read the first one. So I give that away free if they read the first book. But anyway, I just did it because I'm creative and I couldn't stop writing once I started. I had no intention of it being cathartic or therapeutic, but it ends up being that way because of all the research I did. And I started seeing my judicial hearings in a new light. And I saw for the first time really how duplicitous and completely dishonest and just evil they were, the way they conducted the whole thing. It was just totally wrong. And I'm not angry about it anymore. Like maybe if I had really realized that, I would have been really pissed off and in the American sense of being angry.
Yeah.
Because I think that means drunk in your part of the world. I forget. But anyway.
Pissed means drunk over here, but yeah.
But anyway, I would have just been angry, and I don't know what I would have done with that anger, but I think it's almost like physical trauma. Like I've been in a car accident twice actually, where at some points in my life where I didn't really feel that hurt. I went to the hospital because I figured it's probably a good idea, and they're putting like hydrogen peroxide on these huge wounds, these huge burn areas, and I'm thinking that feels kind of nice actually. It's sort of soothing, Well, normally that would sting like crazy and you'd be losing your mind. But and then the days after that, little parts of my body would start to hurt and the pain would radiate from one side of my back to the other and this and that. But it was sort of like it happened in doses that I could handle it. So I think that our bodies automatically have a coping mechanism for physical trauma. So it doesn't. Sometimes it actually isn't even that painful, even though you're in an incredibly bad state. And I think psychologically and emotionally and mentally, we can go through the same process if we kind of let nature take its path. So I think that I should have been smart enough to realize a lot of things a long time ago. But I don't have to think it has to do with me not being smart. I think it just has to do with I have my own journey, and I came to certain realizations when it was time to come to those realizations. I wasn't avoiding them out of fear or anything like that. It's just it wasn't time to look into that yet. So, like I said, with the judicial hearings, I mean, what a farce. It was just awful. And I knew these guys personally, about 5 out of the 6 of them, all 4 out of the 6 of them maybe. And the holy mackerel, it's just horrendous. I mean, their line of reasoning and the way they tried to change the agenda to something else when they realized that the original agenda was not working, that they couldn't prove it anymore. They just changed it to something else. And when that was not provable, they went back to the first way and said, well, anyway, so if you just excuse us for a minute, we're going to make a decision. And then they come back and tell me we're upholding the disfellowshipping action. So, if I had really understood all that at the time, I would have been so furious. I would have been busting out of my skin. But now I look at it and I laugh. I'm like, how stupid are these guys? Or how incompetent can they be? And they really think they're doing God's will and that they have Holy Spirit. It's laughable. So I can laugh at it now. Hopefully everybody can laugh at some of their past traumas, but not all of them are laughable. I realize that.
No, for sure. And you're right about how our minds, much like our bodies, it's like things will come up once we're in a place to be able to deal with it. Like similar to what you described, I'd only just, I had, I think, 5 or 6 attempts at getting reinstated over the course of like 2 years. I kept my nose clean. I was a, model citizen, as it were, and kept getting turned down for it's like, well, not enough time has passed. And I was like, well, there's 10 scriptures to say that it has, and you're being ungodlike by being, holding on to a grudge. So what's going on? Which obviously got me kicked out for longer, because they don't like being talked back at. And so that for a long time, I had this mindset of, well, look, I signed on the dotted line, as it were, or it's a verbal contract when you get baptized. But I was like, well, I knew what I was signing up to. These are the rules, and I broke the rules. So the disfellowshipping and the shunning, that's totally appropriate because I signed up to it. And that was my mindset until very recently. And then I just had this realization of like, do you know, actually no, there was coercion, there was dishonesty, there was blatant just wrongness across the board, and allowing myself just to feel that anger and deal with it, that before had just been brushed under the carpet and just not been addressed, was very liberating. So yeah, things bubble up over time at the right time when we're in the right place to deal with it, which is comforting, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
In my case, the thing that I guess it was a forced liberation is that because I still wanted to, I really wasn't comfortable going to the Kingdom Hall, but I still thought it was the truth and I wanted to be connected. I think the thing that really made my disfellowshipping liberating was that I knew I could never apply for reinstatement. I couldn't, because I was disfellowshipped for getting remarried, which means that they accused me of adultery. Well, right. I have solid proof, absolute proof that is not the case, that I was free to remarry. But they never, ever wanted to consider it. They would not even look at it. And they made claims about, well, yeah, but you were just trying to show us some legal stuff. I said, no, actually, you didn't look at it. So how do you know that it was illegal stuff? It was emails, it was phone numbers, it was names of people that could corroborate my story, witnesses in another state that you could have called. You could have very easily called. Instead, they said, well, we looked into that matter. Well, no, you didn't. All you did was ask my ex-wife, did you do this? And she said, no, that's not looking into something. So I can't go back because, I mean, I don't want to go back anyway, but I can't, because what am I going to do? Say, well, you brothers, you're right. I did commit adultery. I'm lying. I didn't, so to add to the alleged offense of adultery is the real offense of lying. And then I'm supposed to say I prayed to Jehovah about it. Really? I asked for Jehovah's forgiveness for something he knows I didn't do? I mean, yeah, you can ask forgiveness all day long for just maybe speaking out of line to somebody or whatever you think you did wrong that day, but I'm not going to specifically say, I'm so sorry. I realized that I committed adultery. I didn't. So what am I going to repent of, So I finally got over that, once I realized that it's just not even the truth and there's really no reason to go back. It's either way, it doesn't matter. I can't and I don't want to and I won't. But that was freeing, actually, when I realized how there's nothing I could, in other words, I have no power. And my philosophy continues to be, don't fret about stuff you don't have any power over. So I have no ability to go back to the organization. So therefore, I'm not going to try. What's the point? And along with that, because I still at that time believe that we're living in the time of the end. And I don't know if it's going to happen in my lifetime or not. But I really believed, along with that belief set, that we don't know when it's going to come. It might be in my lifetime, or it might be 50 years from now, whatever. And I never believed that every Jehovah's Witness in so-called good standing is going to survive Armageddon. Anybody that's disfellowshipped at that point is not going to, because I realize mistakes are made. And so I never bought into that idea that we know that we're going to be the only survivors. And I just felt that, you know what, I've been honest with my God, which is a lot more than these guys that disfellowship me can say, and they could say it, but it wouldn't be true. So I'm convinced as a believer that whatever the future holds, and at this point, I don't know if the future holds Armageddon, the new system. I don't even know. I don't care. Because what I'm convinced of is that if there is a God of love, the one that I came to believe in, then everything's going to be okay. I'm not supposed to be perfect, so you and I are good people, so what is he going to kill us for not being in a kingdom hall or something? A murderous God is really going to do that, so it just becomes very freeing just being out, because if you can't go back, because it makes you realize that they have to be wrong, because they can't it's impossible, it's inconceivable that these human beings actually have the power to effectively decide who's going to make it through Armageddon, because they disfellowship me unjustly and I can't go back because of that. So therefore I'm done. It's like I'm done. I don't need this anymore, Yeah. That's just my, yes.
It's a huge breakthrough to get to. And one of the big things I've probably mentioned before is there's this idea of, well, where else will we go? You have the sayings of everlasting life, and there's that idea that's drummed into us. And just realize, and the metaphor of being, well, it's better to be in a crappy old lifeboat than drowning in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It's like, well, that would be true, but there's lots and lots of lifeboats out there if you really want them. And that's it's as a metaphor, like all metaphors, it's limited. It's like, well, that's not the only angle of what's going on. And playing a game that's, if spirituality is important to you, as well, I know it is for you, Gary, but for the listener, like, things need to be built, in my opinion, on truthfulness and on love. Surely, if you're believing in the God of the Bible or any other powerful thing, truthfulness and love are kind of the highest principles there. So as a starting point, that's, if the organization just doesn't add up to that, not on a systemic level anyway. But that's a whole rabbit hole we could go down. But something I'm interested in before we wrap up, Gary, is obviously, like, for yourself, it's been quite a journey. You've been deep in the organization. You've seen members of the governing body, been in Bethel, and had this, really interesting set of experiences. And life changes as well. And what I'm always interested in, when someone's been on a journey like that, there are many opportunities along the way where you could have just given up and just said, well, no, I'll stay at this plateau, and I'll stay there, and I'll not make progress, or I'll not recover, or I'll not make this change, or work on this thing and make progress. I'll not fight it, or I'll not let it go. There are lots of these little junctures along the way where a different decision could have been made, a decision to shrink back instead of to step forward. And there's something that's really come out is that, you've dealt with these things intelligently and with wisdom and with earnestness, and you've kept going forward and you've kept persevering. So my question is, what's been the driving force, or the inspiration or passion, or whatever word you use for it, that force and motivation that's kept you going and acting in that way despite the challenges?
Well, in the beginning, when this stuff started happening in 2012, it was just that I was at such a low point that the only thing giving up can mean is just to die, literally. Because, I didn't know what I was going to eat from day to day. There was one whole month that I just ate bagels because somebody gave me a couple of bags. A friend of mine from the radio station got me, hooked me up with a friend of his that has a bagel shop, and he gave me like 2 bags of like probably 3 dozen bagels, and I just froze them, and not in my freezer, but somebody I was living with. And in my own little place, but I just ate like a couple of bagels every day. That's why I didn't have breakfast. I just, so that's to the point that it got. So what does giving up mean? Does that mean, well, forget it, I'm not going to be able to find a job, so that means I'm going to starve, I guess. It means I'm never going to be able to put gas in the car and get anywhere. So that's not acceptable. It's just not acceptable. And I refuse to die, because I'm not ready yet. So that's not particularly inspirational. That's just the reality of but since then, I think, I don't know what I would say about it. I don't know. I always find joy in something. Like the joy of my life now and forever, I think, is the relationship I have with a beautiful woman who also is an ex-Jehovah's Witness. We shouldn't need something like that to survive. But for me, it's what it's all about, because it's we love each other, and we can share experiences and things like that. But all right, that's relatively new. What did I do before that? I don't know. It just seems like some of the time it wasn't particularly the most joyous. Like if I allowed myself to wallow in boredom and self-pity, I could have done that. But I just don't see that as productive. And there's always something I'm trying to accomplish. Like I'm in the middle of, I just wrote a song. Now what do I do with it? It's like a newborn baby. You got to take the baby out and show it to people. We're going to leave it in the closet, So I just wrote a song. So now it's time to record it. Now it's time to play it somewhere. So, and in fact, Jackie and I just finished a song. It's a Christmas song, first one I ever wrote. and we're anxious to get that in the bag and put it up on Amazon and Spotify and distribute that to everybody. So like I got at least another week of I have to live because I got to get that stuff done. There's just always something to look forward to in the future. Always the world, and I really think you need to see the world as a beautiful place. You kind of alluded to that before. That being in the Borg, as we call it, you're taught to hate the world, to fear the world. It's Satan's world. Everything about it is garbage. There's a beautiful flower here and there, but basically the world is something to be feared. And the real beauty and the real life and everything is for the future. When you realize that that's a lot of hokey nonsense, then you start to see the world as more beautiful. I mean, I'm just looking at my window now. You can't see it, but I live in Montana, just a beautiful part of the country. It's just fantastic. I've only been here for a couple of months. And every time I just drive 5 minutes down the road and I see these majestic mountains in the background, it's like, it's unbelievable. So how can you tell me that because there are lots of rotten people in the world, I get it. We're all afraid of Corona, I guess, and politics is always ugly, this and that, but that just comes with the territory. There's so much beauty out there. There are so many good people, all these so-called worldly people. A lot of them are the most moral people you'll ever want to meet. Far more moral than anybody that decides that they're going to kick their 16-year-old kid out because they smoked a cigarette, or something like that. There's just so much beauty in the world, and I can't. I want it, and I want to contribute to it. And so if I wrote a song, or I'm starting a new job next Monday, an actual financial advisor position, I'm looking forward to that. So there's so much to look forward to. It's not any inspiration from a guru or from a new philosophy or something like that. It's just the things around me are just too good to not realize and to not want to grab the brass ring.
Yeah, awesome. I love that. Great. Well, thank you very much. It would be so easy for us with all of these interviews. It's so easy to just like talk and talk and talk. We could go for a long time, and we'll have to arrange something one day. I know Rodney, when things are getting back up and running, we'll look at doing something live when we can again. But in the meantime, anyone who wants to check out what Gary's busy with, he's got some great projects on the go. The book was Force of Will by Tan Swiftwater. I got that right? Mm-hmm. And the website, if you want to speak with Gary about the life coaching work he's doing, and I always emphasize that it's really important to just have that outside perspective sometime on a situation where we can just get that insight, get that perspective. So if you want to see what Gary's got to say, check out www.openpathlifecoach.com, and I'll share the link to all of his stuff in the description of this podcast. So thank you very much, Gary, for joining me. This has been a blast. And,
thank you.
And I look forward to hearing your Christmas song. Do share that across as well when you get the link, and I'll put that in the description of the podcast as well so people can check it out.
Very good. Thank you.
Sam, thanks a lot.
All right. Bye-bye.
Cheers.